Good day everyone. I am Michael, moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is CMS Hospital Restraint and Seclusion, Navigating the Most Problematic CMS Standards and Proposed Changes. I would now like to introduce our presenter for today, Laura A. Dixon. Laura A. Dixon, BS, GD-RN, CPH-RM, served as the Director, Facility Patient Safety and Risk Management and Operations for CoP from 2014 to 2020. In her role, Ms. Dixon provided patient safety and risk management consulting and training to facilities, practitioners, and staff in multiple states. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Laura.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael, for that very nice introduction. And as Michael mentioned, we're talking about one of the most problematic standards within the entire conditions of participation for CMS. Other studies have showed if you have more RNs, you really can decrease your need. So we've talked about the news, we've talked about some studies. I want to start just taking a little quick side step over to the conditions of participation. What are we talking about today? As far as when CMS sends out new regulations, whether it's a new manual or a new rule, they put them into the survey memo. It's called policy and memos to states. In 2019, CMS made some changes through the hospital improvement rule. I mentioned that there were deficiencies and you don't want to get them. There is hospitalinspections.org. Why did they get cited? What was the basis of them? Not following their own policy and procedures. Now you probably think that when surveyors come out, you wonder, did you guys have any training in what you're expecting? Yes, they do. And in fact, the nice thing is you can access it now. It's free. CMS actually has a separate manual for complaints, for death reporting and investigations in this complaint manual. So death reporting, this is restraint and seclusion. I start with seclusion because it's a shorter section. In fact, there's only one tag number that talks about seclusion. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the bulk of this program. Overall, restraints are held under the patient rights section. It is by far the largest section in the entire manual. How do we come with the decision to use them? Well, that's from an individualized assessment of that patient. There are multiple reasons to restrain, and CMS does provide us some ideas. Aggressive, they can't follow directions. And they do also mention that hospital leadership has a strong role. So what do you want to consider as far as that fall assessment? CMS goes as far as to talk about weapons. There are certain items that are not covered by this law, by this rule, and that those applied and used by law enforcement. Handcuffs, for example, such as the restraint chair that's used to transfer a patient to and from the hospital and from court. As far as the surveyor, what they'll look at is your policy and procedures. They may talk to a sample of patients. Tag 159 does give us definitions and starts with physical restraint. So an appropriate use, it helps them function better in the world. They can participate in therapy. They also talk about in tag 161, what is not a restraint? Physically holding a patient who's violent, self-destructive, yes. Also age-specific situation and devices, strollers, safety swing belts. Guidelines say we must do that assessment. Plan of care was the next one they did to also talk about in the conditions. As far as techniques that you're putting on, they're implemented, of course, safely and appropriate techniques. CMS also talks about protocols. Then there's the standing or PRN order. Why do we need to notify them? You can determine the timeframes for renewal, but put that into your policy and procedures. Your policy should also include frequency of monitoring. How much? Well, unless you're using both restraint and seclusion at the same time, items to document. And again, these are things that CMS has recommended. Skin, circulation, respiration. But just keep in mind that anything you're doing has to go through QAPI. 1 hour rule assessment. This is tag 178. And I'm going to let you know right up front. And the reason they made these big changes is because American Hospital Association sued CMS over it. So what do you do with that evaluation? If you're restraining and secluding a patient all at once, and of course documentation. Anybody who has direct patient contact has to have it. At least they have to have education, training, and demonstrated knowledge of those trigger factors. And those, again, who do order them have to have a working knowledge of what your policy is. There are associations that can do training. You just have to look at the cost, weigh the cost as far as the time spent in doing it. They did give us a definition of reasonable to assume. All right, briefly with Joint Commission with the 10 minutes we have. They made multiple changes. So we're using safe techniques to apply them, and we're following, of course, laws and regulation. It's based upon an individual order. Now they talk about de-escalation. Again, CMS doesn't require it. Now here's just some suggestions. Can't give you any legal advice. These are just things to think about. Include a statement in the patient rights section. You have to give them a copy of their rights anyway, so you might as well put it in it. CMS does not establish a standard of care. That's up to you folks. You get to do that. They're just looking for the regulations. They want it safe for everybody, and especially the patient. And I want to say thank you for everything you do for these patients. They're tough and they're challenging, and we're still trying to work out how we can best take care of them. So I wanted to say thank you for what you do for them. And thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Laura. So that does conclude the session for today. Thank you everyone for participating. Hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation. You may all disconnect now. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.